All right, guys. So we're gonna be taking a look at chapter four. So chapter four is deals with supervising a diverse workforce. You're gonna find that in the workplace we have different cultures, different religions, different uh, uh, sexual orientations, right? So we have to understand that everybody bring something to the table. And we have to, at the end of the day, make sure that the team has cohesion and is successful at accomplishing the task. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Now, this graphic here shows a progression. Now, let's sort of like backtrack in history. Think about how in the 1950s, 1960s, African Americans were having a hard time getting hired, right? Eventually, we had the Civil Rights Act uh, that made it illegal to for African Americans to get discriminated against, right? So there was tolerance, right? So this graphic is going to show this progression and how companies, how businesses and organizations started having an upward trend when it comes to uh, tolerance and then eventually inclusion of other peoples and other cultures. So first you have tolerance, which is imagine them saying, "Yeah, I guess we accept differences, I guess," right? So that would be tolerance. Uh, they can work, you know, that company can work with other cultures and other races, etc., right? So I'm talking about this would be in the 60s or in the 50s where you would go to a law firm or you would go to a company and most people that worked there were white, right? And I'm talking about the 40s and the 50s. But like I said, with time there came first tolerance. And then some laws were passed that some of them said that people should not be discriminated against, right? So a lot of companies went to the next step, which is compliance. And this basically means that they were meeting the legal requirements. Okay, so you have compliance. Um, and then you have eventually, you would say in the 80s and the 90s, you have diversity. Um, this is when companies recognize different values and the differences between cultures, right? And nowadays, you can say that we have inclusion. Inclusion is when we actively use differences to improve performance. Um, so you can argue, you could say that a diverse company that has inclusion that is an advantage because you have many different points of view, even from different cultures. But not only that, but different ages, right, in generations. This is not, we're not just talking about race or culture, but we're also talking about age and experience, right? So you have, these are the categories here, right? You have uh, race and ethnic origin, gender, disability. Some people are disabled, some people are not. Age, uh, back in the day, if you were over 40, you were discriminated against, right? Religion, and military service. So these are some of the categories that, and again, we just have to be aware of differences and manage employees as individuals and understand that some of these groups are protected. For instance, veterans are protected by law sometimes, and we're going to be talking about more on this. So there's one big misconception. Some people think that you can't discipline protected employees. For instance, people that have a disability or are a racial minority. That's a myth, right? The reality is that every employee should be held accountable, right? And must meet the same standards. right? If that employee is a veteran or more than 40 years old, or has a different sexual orientation, etc., right? All employees must meet the same standards. Diversity does not mean lower expectations, right? This is very important. It means that we should be fair and consistent when it comes to expectations. Uh, this is how you avoid problems and lead effectively, right? So even if somebody has a disability or has a different culture, religion, everybody should be held accountable to the same standards. Okay, so I'm gonna give you, you can pause this slide. This slide is very uh, law heavy. These were some of the laws that were passed back in the day. And this is what they did. Equal Pay Act, protected class, gender, equal pay for equal work, right? A lot of, back in the day, a lot of, especially women they were getting paid less than men. And this was true, right? Civil Rights Act of 64 protected uh, uh, African Americans, Asian Americans, and people that had different religions because they were having a hard time uh, getting jobs back in the 60s. So I'm just going to give you a time to pause this, get all of these in your notebook, okay? And because these might be on the test. All right, let's continue. Okay, so some of the historical catalysts. So diversity didn't just happen overnight. There were basically two key moments. Um, if you remember from history class, the 1940s were very important, particularly for women and minorities. If you were to take a time machine and go back to the 40s and go to a factory in, let's say, Chicago or New York, uh, say a radio factory, right? Most workers would be white men. Okay, this is true. But something funny happened in the 1940s. There was this big war called World War II, where most men went to Europe or the Pacific Ocean to fight the Axis powers, right? The bad guys. And a lot of those people that used to do those jobs in factories had to go to war. And that left an opening for, well, first of all, women. Women were not working back in the 40s, right? Traditionally, women back in the day, they stayed home and taking care of the family. But with the men gone, a lot of these women stepped up and worked in factories, right? To build weapons, to build things for the military. And this is one of the first times in history where a lot of women said, you know what, I kind of like this work thing. I think I'm going to keep doing it, right? And even when the men came back from the war, a lot of women wanted to stay working and work those jobs. And this was a major shift when it comes to women in the workplace. Okay. It was very rare for women to work back in the day, but this sort of made it more a in mainstay, and women started working more and more afterwards. Now, it doesn't mean that they were getting the same pay or the same opportunities, not at all. But women jumped into the workforce because they wanted to. Uh, they stayed in the workforce even after they came back, and also African American men, right? Black Americans. Uh, this presented a great opportunity for them to get those jobs that they were not able to get before, right? And some of those roles in factories. So that was in the 1940s. In the 1950s, there was something called the Civil Rights Movement, right? And if you recall from history lesson, again from history class, There was the Rosa Parks incident when she refused to give up her seat, and she, defied what we call Jim Crow laws or segregation laws, right? And this sparked this American civil rights movement where, very famously, Martin Luther King fought for, alongside others, right? Fought for civil rights for minorities. And after this, government passed some laws that would benefit minorities in the workplace. The Civil Rights Act of 64 made sure that the workplace or the company, the organization, could not discriminate based on gender and race, right? So these are two key moments in our history where there were some changes when it comes to gender and race in the workplace, right? All right, let's move on. Okay, so let's take a look at some real challenges. Now, this slide shows sort of like a chain reaction, right? You have the root cause, which is um, why minorities had struggled in our past, right? And this is, if, again, if you study history, you know that minorities had it the worst, right? In a lot of cases, when it comes to African Americans and Hispanics, we didn't have the best books or teachers. I'm talking about the 50s and the 40s, right? And there was an education gap, right? Because all the good materials went uh, to non-minorities, right? Uh, the best schools, the best teachers, the best you name it, right? So there was an education gap, right? Uh, in some cases, language barriers, right? Language difficulties, and in a lot of cases, a lack of organizational understanding. And these are your systematic, excuse me, root causes, right? These are your systematic root causes. And a step down, you have workplace effects, right? Less access to training, less access to education. You have exclusion from informal networks, right? And stereotyping or prejudice, right? Uh, and again, if you're not, if you happen to be a minority, it's very hard to break through that community where somebody can give you or they're hiring over there, right? See if you can apply, right? If you're not part of that community, it's very hard to, you're being excluded, right? So individual impact, that's the last category here. Lower confidence, and maybe your skills are overlooked or lack of role models. So these are some of the barriers that minorities have faced in the past. Now, thankfully, this has eroded to a certain degree. We don't live in a perfect society by any means, but objectively, we can look back and definitely um, see a change or progress for the better. Okay. Now, now let's focus on gender. Now, this slide shows balance, right? And the truth is, there are some differences between men and women, right? And this is very hard because women that choose to be mothers and they have children, in some cases, can be very difficult, right? They have to balance their career, they have to balance their work life, right, and family responsibilities. And this can be very, very difficult. And I can attest to this because my wife is a teacher as well, and we have two kids, And although we share responsibilities of raising and helping our kids with homework, with, and when it comes to chores and cooking and all of that, it's her ship, right? And my wife runs the ship at home, right, per se, and she's in charge of, the kitchen, right? That's her thing. Uh, and when it comes to taking the kids to taekwondo or like piano lessons, right? So even though I'm as the husband, I'm very much involved. She runs the home, right? So it's very difficult, for women to sort of like juggle and balance these two aspects. Now, there are some laws that can benefit women and responsibilities. The first one is the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. It grants up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave in a 12-month period for birth, adoption, or if something happens, illness or something. Now, you don't get paid, but you're guaranteed that you can come back to your old job, right? You're not going to lose your job. Okay. Then we have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, or PDA. Pregnancy must be treated no differently than any other medical illness or disability, right? So you cannot discriminate against pregnancy. Okay, and then we have comparable worth. Jobs should be paid at the same level when requiring similar skills, extending the Equal Pay Act. Okay, so these are some of the challenges that women face in our modern society. Now, let's get into the workplace culture. Now, we have two major issues. Um, so now we have to define what sexual harassment is. Sexual harassment in a nutshell is unwanted behavior that creates a hostile environment. These can be unwelcome sexual advances. If somebody touches you, if somebody requests something that you're not comfortable with, um, and this you might be liable for this behavior. Now, and then you have gender stereotyping, judging based on assumptions, right? And the solution is, you could say, mentoring plus development plus accountability, right? Supervisors must protect the culture, right? Now, navigating disability accommodations. Now, this slide shows a decision process here, right? We have the accommodation decision tree. So supervisors must ask, right? If let's say that somebody has a disability and they're requiring uh, uh, modifications to their job. Let's say that you had an accident and you lost some fingers and you can't perform the work as usual. You require some accommodation. So this is a decision tree that supervisors must take into account. Um, Now, if the company has less than 15 employees, under the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, if you have less than 15 employees, it won't apply under that law. But if you have 15 or more employees, it might, or it will, right? According to the tree. Um, Now, the next question is, can they do the essential task? Uh, if they can perform the essential job, uh, yes. Okay, so you go to the next stage. If they require reasonable accommodation, uh, you go to the next stage. If the answer is yes, does this create an undue hardship for the employer? If let's say that you are building radios, right? If if there's a way that by modifying the task or the process of making the radio, when it comes to that person building the radio, uh, does this mean that we have to change the process altogether? If the answer is yes, then maybe we should find another role for that employee. But if the answer is no, and even if they're missing fingers, if they have this disability, and they can actually still perform the task with several modifications to the process, well, we provide the accommodation, right? Because that's the sensible thing to do, right? As long as we're not delayed in the process, as long as the employee can still function and perform, then yeah, we provide the accommodation. Maybe we have to change the the process a little bit. Um, and I just realized that I was out of frame. All right. All right. So the next slide here, we have considerations for age and religion. So we have two more important areas. So we have age, which we have another law for that, right? The Age Discrimination and Employment Act, right? And th it just means that there should be no discrimination against older workers, right? And also when it comes to religion, uh, let's say that if you have Muslim employees, there must be reasonable accommodations since, for example, they have to pray a certain number of times a day. So, if it's within reason to provide those accommodations and it doesn't affect the work, then by all means, we should provide those accommodations. Um, and again, employees cannot be permitted to create a hostile work environment for others that practice, different religions. So supervisory responsibility is, just use objective standards and avoid bias. Maintain a respectful environment. Now, think about this. So kind of like zoom out a little bit and think about this. Workplaces are global now and nowadays, right? Supervisors have to deal with different cultures, different expectations, different communication styles. Some older folks, don't text too much, right? They prefer phone calls or Zoom calls or, emails, right? So we have different communication styles. And multinational companies operate across countries, right? So supervisors must be culturally aware and legally informed, right? So this is the real world tension, right? Supervisors may feel afraid to discipline sometimes and worried about discriminatory or discrimination claims. But here's the truth, right? Avoiding decisions creates more problems, right? So also reverse discrimination concerns, internal resentment, right? So what's the solution? Just have clear communication and be consistent. Um, right? At the end of the day, uh, employees have to perform, right? Regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of culture, right? They have to perform. So this is the most important slide here. And after everything we discussed, the answer is simple, right? We want fairness. We want fairness. And two key skills, right? You have cultural competency, and which is the ability to understand and adapt to different cultures and communities, and inclusion, right? Giving everyone a real chance to contribute, right? So the final takeaway, treat people fairly and value differences. Hold everybody accountable, and that's everybody. And that's the basis for good supervision. Okay, I'm going to stop here, guys. I think I went a little bit over. So we'll see you in chapter 5.